In recent years, there's been an interesting new category of smartphones which we can't definitely define as mid-range, but are devices which are considered almost flagships. Devices like the iPhone 11, devices like the Samsung S21 FE, and other devices which are just under flagship prices but offer you the majority of features, whilst cutting back in a few not too important areas. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is one of those devices. It's a follow-up to the very successful and very popular Samsung S20 FE. In the S21 FE, which was released in 2022, ironically after the launch of the Samsung Galaxy S22 series, the Samsung S21 FE offers great value for money, but not everything is perfect. The device we ordered for Tech Travel Geeks from the Samsung UK site was the entry-level device. It has 6GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. Sadly, the storage on the S21 FE is not expandable with microSD cards, unlike its predecessor, the Samsung S20 FE. 128GB should be enough for most people, but we're in an era where sometimes 4K video takes up a lot of space, especially if you're creating that content with the cameras on the device. It is maybe a bit of a constraint, so bear that in mind if you're buying a device and consider to be using it in future as a media creation device. The Samsung S21 FE has a lovely big, or relatively medium big, 6.4-inch display. It is a Full HD Plus one, and it's Super AMOLED, which means that it has very good contrast ratio, it's pretty good in direct sunlight, and more importantly, it gives you those nice punchy colours that Samsung has made a lot of people very used to. The S21 FE's screen is the main part at the front of the device, and that's coated in Gorilla Glass Victus. That means that it's going to be very resistant to mainly impact and smashing, but it also is slightly more resistant to scratches. In almost 6 months of using this device as a secondary one, and more recently as a primary device, I can say that it definitely has held up well to the test of time. The frame to the Samsung S21 FE is an aluminium one, and while the front is glass, the back is unapologetically plastic, or as the Samsung marketing materials call it, glastic. I have no issue with that. I'm actually quite happy to have a plastic back to the phone. It makes it much lighter, it handles heat dissipation better in my view, and more importantly, it makes you worry less about using it without a case. Having said that, if you've been watching the Tech Travel Geeks for a while, you know that we've unboxed and reviewed quite a few cases for the Samsung S21 FE, and I settled for the Batman one. But getting back to the Samsung S21 FE, the design is very, very pleasant to use. Ergonomically, it fits well in the hand, whether you have a case on it or not. And that's down to the sides of the device aren't perfectly flat, unlike the ones on the iPhone 13 Pro that we've seen here on the Tech Travel Geeks YouTube channel, or the Nothing Phone 1. The slight curvature of that metal frame and very, very gentle curving at the very edges of the flat screen make the device simple to hold, but really quite pleasant in my hand. And that 6.4-inch screen size means that for most people this will be a lot more manageable than some much larger devices which are 6.8 inches or higher. The screen has a cutout at the top. That's a cutout for a 32 megapixel selfie camera. It works very well, both for video calls and for taking selfies. And in my experience, there's nothing really to shout out about, but also no reason to complain. Speaking of cameras, on the back, the Samsung S21 FE has 3 cameras. The main camera is a very good 12 megapixel one. It's arguably on a par with the output of a Google Pixel with a 12 megapixel sensor, whether that's the Google Pixel 5 or the more recent Google Pixel 6a. And that is high praise in many ways. It takes good, clear shots. And Samsung have a very good version of night mode, which handles most situations very, very well. The main 12 megapixel sensor is also used for recording 4K video. But that 4K video is steady, it has good detail in it, even in relatively low light conditions. Alongside the 12 megapixel main sensor, there's two very useful cameras. One is an 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor. It produces good shots, but the color saturation and reproduction isn't as good as on the main sensor. If you're looking for a wide-angle shot to make your cat look like a giant, or for a bit of architecture photography, this is a really good wide-angle lens. And then the third lens on the Samsung S21 FE is, in this case, a telephoto lens. That is a 12 megapixel sensor, and it gives you the equivalent of 3 times optical zoom. Great if you're wanting to not disturb your kittens whilst you're taking a picture of them, and get a lot of detail as well. It's a very good 3 times optical zoom. Now, with a combination of the main sensor and the telephoto sensor, this camera app on the S21 FE allows you to zoom in. And I found shots up to 5 times zoom are very, very usable. 10 times, you start noticing a lot of noise and the lack of detail, and it will go all the way up to 30 times zoom, but that's not really a very usable picture that comes out of it. But for all main uses of photography, whether it's for social media or for print, the camera setup on the S21 FE is excellent. Now, Samsung have their own photo editing app on Samsung devices. It often gets updated with new features, and as it came out of the box, I was really surprised to see that the Samsung S21 FE had one of the latest Google Pixel features that we saw on the Google Pixel 6 Pro, the Magic Eraser feature. So it's great to see that built into the Samsung S21 FE, and it makes for some fun photo adjustments depending on what you're doing with them. Now, the Samsung S21 FE, we've said, is capable of 4K video. That's because both the Samsung Exynos variant and the Qualcomm Snapdragon variant have that capability. There was a bit of confusion when I purchased the phone and in subsequent tests and checks as of if the device we had was a Samsung Exynos chipset phone or a Qualcomm Snapdragon. I've finally concluded that this is the Snapdragon 888 chipset, so the 2021 flagship chipset from Qualcomm. It breezes through games like Call of Duty, it can handle 4K video editing very well. It plays most games flawlessly, even at high definition settings. Having said that, I'm not a big Genshin Impact fan, so I didn't really put it through its paces with that game, but for Call of Duty Mobile, which can be very demanding, I was very happy with the performance. The Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 chipset offers a lot of computing power. Arguably for most people it's more than enough. The only issue I've had with that is that sometimes, especially if you're doing heavy stuff like a lot of camera videography, a lot of photography and gaming, the battery will be impacted. It is quite a thirsty chipset with the way it's been set up by Samsung and the One UI or Samsung Android distribution that's on the device. Heat has never really been an issue for me, but then again, I live in Scotland where anything over 20 degrees is considered a heat wave. One of the things that I was quite happy to see on the Samsung S21 FE was relatively fast charging. And I say relatively fast charging because what Samsung calls super fast charging is only in actual fact 25 watt charging. It works, but it's not as good as what we've become used to from other brands, including Xiaomi, who offer 120 watt charging in similarly priced devices. The Samsung S21 FE is a great device all round, and I've been pleasantly surprised to see how well Samsung supports the software on the device. The monthly security updates come through pretty fast. So Samsung are doing a really good job with the software updates. It's not just the operating system, it's also all the apps that Samsung pre-install on the device and which are there. We briefly mentioned the photo editor, but that's just one of a myriad of apps pre-installed on the Samsung device. A lot of these duplicate functions that Google apps offer, things like Samsung Pay and all sorts of other Samsung apps, which I had to go through quite a lengthy process of uninstalling or disabling to get the Android experience I prefer, which is mainly Google apps based. So in terms of Samsung apps, there's a lot of them. You can very simply disable them or uninstall them. But sometimes it's frustrating to have two apps for the same thing on the device. But all credit to Samsung where it's due. Their software and security updates have been top-notch since the beginning of 2022 for us. So, okay, we've talked about the chipset to the Samsung S21 FE and the fact that it was a bit of a drain on the battery. The S21 FE has a 4,500 mAh battery. It's good for, in normal use, a full day's battery use. That means social media, text messaging, Telegram messages, essentially all the usual smartphone usage, with some light gaming or video streaming thrown in. The moment you start doing a bit more photography, a bit more videography, the battery life will drain very, very fast. It was a bit disappointing, but considering the price range of the device and the other benefits you get from it, it's a trade-off that had to be made. And from what I hear from other reviewers, it's still better than the actual Samsung S21. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is definitely an improvement to those other reviewers, but still not up to the competition from companies like Xiaomi in this price range. Just look at our long-term review of the Xiaomi 11T Pro 5G that we released earlier this year. That really threw a lot of weight behind battery and efficiency. The Samsung obviously had to make a cut there to bring this device in the right price range. So to wrap up this long-term review of the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, it is a great all-round device. It's maybe not as good as other competitors in its price category, but if you trust Samsung as a brand, and you want to go back to the familiar Samsung bloopity bloops or One UI, I would definitely recommend the Samsung S21 FE. It's a very handleable phone, it's not too big, it's not too small, it is a great all-round device, but sadly the battery life isn't as good as its competitors. For most people, smartphones are an everyday use. They don't upgrade on a monthly or yearly basis. They usually have at least 2 years with the device. And I can definitely recommend the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE for someone who's wanting a safe phone that will last them well over 2 years. It is a little bit more durable than some more premium or more expensive devices with its plastic back. It's lighter and more pleasant to use in my experience. And overall, the camera is great, the performance is great. You really can't go that wrong with it, unless, of course, you're traveling a lot and using it as your main camera. It is a great red device all round, apart from if you're a real power user. Thanks for watching this long-term review of the Tech Travel Geek's use of the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. We have a series of videos of how to use the device, how to make changes on the device, as well as our other videos about or related to it. If you don't already, please do subscribe to the Tech Travel Geeks here on YouTube. We cover consumer electronics, gadgets, accessories, and anything we think makes the travel experience better. As usual, if you have any questions or you'd like to know more, please leave a comment in the section below. And for now, thanks for watching and goodbye from us.